Welcome to the Journos on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm Peter Martin, Hugh McDonald, Michael Grant and Alison McConnell are with me on the show. If you like what you're watching and listening to, don't forget to subscribe to PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. And of course, thank you to so many of you who have complimented our content on the podcast as well. So with that, if you want it all at your fingertips, you can download the PLZ Soccer app. We are here to talk football. Philippe Clement. To sack or not to sack? That's the question we'll discuss today. He's certainly not scared of the sack and certainly doesn't feel as if he is close to it, the Rangers manager. You can give us your thoughts in the comments section below. We'll also talk about the Dons in the second half of the season. What can Aberdeen do to change their fortunes? And we'll discuss dementia as well. How do we solve a problem like dementia? And the reason why it sounds like a song is sometimes when it gets to the advanced stage, some people can only remember a picture or a song, and it's the only door that opens out to their life and what has gone before. And we deal with sportsmen off the back of Dean Windass and what he had to say about the stage 2 dementia that he has. How do we solve that problem? How do we help people who need care when they suffer from dementia and Alzheimer's? So that's all to discuss. And if we get to the end of that, we might even discuss the great sack race in the English Premier League. Managers not given really enough time, and there's been more than a few sacked in the Premier League in England up until 2024 ended. We'll discuss that as well. So, and with sacking in mind, it's not a nice topic, never a nice topic, but Philippe Clement has this difficult balancing act, Hugh, game by game, fans losing complete patience with him, what he has to say, his team, the fact that they're 16 points behind Celtic, up until obviously the game they have in hand. It's a dilemma where he knows what's been happening with the board, but the fans don't care about that. Results is all that matters.
Yeah, it was always a difficult thing with the Rangers strategy. We talked about it before. The Rangers strategy is no rinse and repeat. That's fine. Change the player model, yep, that's sensible. Lower the wage bill, yep, that's sensible. But what that does is it decreases, and certainly in the short term, perhaps for longer, but certainly in the short term, decreases your chances of competing with a rival that hasn't to do any of those things. So when you get the theory is great, and then when you put it into practice, that's when the trouble starts, because suddenly people look at you, behind in the league, lost the first cup of the season, never got to Champions League, etc., and they can see there is no hope of for example, the old sort of way of working. The January window for Rangers at this time of year, well, let's throw everything at it. Let's go out and get this one, that one, the next one. They're talking about one or two in, one of whom might be Cameron of Dundee. So people are getting to see the reality now, Peter, and it's going to be difficult for any manager to take up that.
The other thing about this, Ali, is it's not as simple as the performances. There's a layer upon layer of problems that people are questioning. The structure, the board, the recruitment, all of these things come into the mix that goes against him effectively when he, and of course, let's not forget, managers do trot out from time to time the fairly legitimate claim, listen, we've got quite a lot of injuries.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is gross mismanagement that's gone on for a long time throughout the club is now come to fruition when you see a manager with a catalogue of issues that he has to address while he looks to stabilise the club. On the pitch, he has to deal with everything off it. He has to bring the wage bill down. He has to cut his cloth financially accordingly while trying to compete with a Celtic side who are light years ahead in terms of finances, resources and just where they are as a club. Celtic have enjoyed essentially for the last 25 years. They've been there or thereabouts every season, maybe barring that end of the 9 in a row season, their campaign to go and get 10 in a row. Other than that, they've been fiercely competitive and dominant all the way through. So where they are as a club is very different to where Rangers find themselves now. There is a long-held culture within Rangers of being the successful club, of competing for trophies, and what you're seeing now is it's just not viable. It's just not where they are at the minute, and that was always going to be unpalatable to try and sell to support. And we spoke about this at the very start of the season, because Philippe Clement has been he's stuck to the same mantra every week. If you're at press conferences, I've had to lower the wage bill, I've not got the same finances to go out and recruit. It's been the same message that's come through from the eve of the season. Every other press conference has been very repetitive in terms of reinforcing this message. My hands are tied financially. I've got to lower the wage budget, and I've got to bring in players that can compete, and I need time to do it. It's a long-term project. That's fine in theory, but the reality is when it's not working, when you're 16 points behind, there's a lot of noise that goes with it.
The other big problem as well is fans are not privy to the discussions that go on in the background. They're bemused by the fact he's got a contract until 2028. They can't believe that. He's of the opinion that he's not going to resign. Of course, why would you? You've just signed a contract in 2028. But he's obviously privy to the inner sanctum discussions with the board, which I believe firmly, Michael, I said it months ago, and shot down by all and sundry of the disbelievers of the Rangers support. But there are some people who can go, I don't think they can afford to sack him.
Well, they denied that last Saturday. We sat down with Patrick Stewart at Ibrox for, it was the best part of an hour. And
what did you make of his comments?
Well, listen, I thought Partick Thistle was pretty impressive in the circumstances, I mean, I don't think his message landed very well with the Rangers support, and I think he knew that it wasn't going to land very well. But I thought the guy had a bit of substance about him. You could see that, he'd been at United for 18 years or whatever, Man United for 18 years. I thought he did all right in that sense, but that's neither here nor there, frankly. It's the messaging that he put out to the Rangers support. But he was asked, is it a financial decision not to sack the manager? He said absolutely not. He said there's still good revenue streams at this club. We know there's annual losses and we need to address those, but there's revenue streams. Effectively, we're saying if we wanted to or had to sack Clement, we can do it. Clement, any time that I've seen him talk this season, and it's kind of, his future has occasionally bubbled up, hasn't it? Or sorry, frequently bubbled up this season. When they lose to Celtic, when they lost to Kiev, there's various, Kilmarnock, they get beat, Aberdeen, they get beat. There's various points where it's kind of bubbled up as an issue, his future. And he has always stuck to this mantra that there's a project here, as Ali says, as Hugh said, it's like get the wage bill down, get the age of the squad down, get players in who are marketable. That's all fine, but all that can happen with another manager, And I thought, I don't know if that's quite the shield for Clement that he kind of imagined it is, because as Ali talked about noise, and that's exactly the problem at a club like Rangers, that as soon as it starts to wobble again, and you saw it before and after the Old Firm game with the away draws and the away defeat, all the noise bubbles right up again, and the agenda is, are you sacking the manager? So when Patrick Stewart sits down for the first time with the media, and in the first minute he says, right, let's cut to the chase, we're sticking with the manager. So, that is the agenda. And listen, I think Clement's future will bubble up again before very long, won't it?
Yeah. Have they moved the tolerance? Because for me, in the last 40 years, a manager at Rangers, 16 points behind Celtic, is no longer there. Have they moved that back to say, listen, because of circumstances along the way, you have John Bennett coming out and saying we can't keep going through this, as Hugh mentioned, rinse and repeat. Yeah. So have they moved the tolerance of this because of their predicament?
But I mean, when Clement came in, the language then was, amongst fans, amongst the media, commentators, everything was, you can't keep sacking managers. And that makes sense, of course, you can't keep sacking. We know how ruinous it's been for Rangers to keep sacking managers in the finances and the kind of mess of the squad they've got that's been assembled under 3 or 4 different coaches, maybe more. So that's all fine, and can't keep sacking managers. And then what happens? The same Old Firm defeats, European elimination from the Champions League, domestic drop points, they fall behind Celtic, and then the whole narrative is, well, we need to change the manager, And whether it works or not, whether you admire it or not, the board have shown a bit of strength here and said, right, no. And I don't think the Rangers board is a strong board, and it hasn't been for years. But the populist thing to do over the last few days would have been to sack Clement. And they haven't done it. They might do it. They might have to do it soon enough. But for now, Patrick Stewart said, no, we're going to stick with this guy. And, you know, they'll beat Fraserburgh at the weekend. The Man United game at Old Trafford, who knows what's going to happen that night. Both clubs are flaky and both teams are flaky. I still think United might beat them. But if they get credible results, it just lowers the temperature around Clement for a while. I think a lot of us here would have thought the Premier Sports Cup final against Celtic, the Spurs game and the New Year derby would finish Clement because there was no prospect of him coming through that without taking a lot of damage. In actual fact, they were very competitive in the cup final, although they got beat. They were good against Tottenham. They were very good in the derby. But it's all the other games that let them down, you know?
Yeah.
St Mirren, Motherwell, Hibs, Dundee. Yeah.
We all know breaking point is quite simply when I watched the game against St Johnstone, albeit there's a nice little purple patch of 3 goals. The breaking point comes when there's more and more empty seats. You know, the Union Bears walking out it doesn't mean anything really in the broad scheme of things for a board. They'll look at it and go, right, you lot are walking out. But when you start to get vast gaps where there's sensible fans saying, listen, 16 points is just not good enough and we don't like the way he's playing and we don't like what he's saying, we're not having it. That's when a board usually starts to say, you know, the game's up.
Yeah, and there's kind of collateral damage in this as well. You feel sorry for Fraserburgh because you just think to yourself, they've drawn Rangers at eyebrows and think, well, that's our next 10 years budget, you know, come in and you say, well, what kind of support will be there? That'll be an interesting one because obviously empty seats at Premiership games, that might have an optical sort of downside, but it doesn't have any financial downside really because all the seats are paid for.
Yeah.
What is interesting is I think Fraserburgh will be a sign of, you know, just how many are going to come along. Look at season ticket renewals. I still think the season ticket renewals will be pretty robust because they have been always. But Rangers, that was something that Rangers have got to look at because, I mean, I think, you know, the penny is dropping now. I think a lot of Rangers fans are looking at this and saying, you know, this is now par for the course. I mean, what is it? Celtic have lost 1 title in 14 or something like that. Yeah. You're saying to yourself, this is not a blip. This is not a little era. This is not, it turns like Celtic in the 90s, it turned. No, this is something more significant. This is now in a game where money is a decisive factor, right? You can spend a lot of money and be rotten, but you need to spend a lot of money to be good.
Yeah.
The thing is that Patrick Stewart's talking about. I mean, there's a what do you call it, a review of the entire club, the entire football department, right? Now, even if Rangers in the next 6 months, year or whatever, start to get everything right, get the right appointments in place around the club, sign well, even that might not be enough. Because of the advantages that Celtic have.
Yes.
For Rangers to get back to where they want to be, they need to get all their aspects right, and they also have to hope that Celtic implode or deteriorate enough.
Well, that's the big conundrum,
It's not
Michael.
impossible, but Celtic have to get a lot wrong, you know. And I know they have to qualify for the Champions League, and all Scottish teams are kind of a bit flaky on that, but. As you says about the money, it's because of the kind of inbuilt advantages that Celtic have from getting regular Champions League access. And Rangers have been a Europa League team effectively for years, done all right in it, but the income isn't the same as the Champions League.
Yeah.
So the cycle of players, also just a way that Celtic, if they never qualified for the Champions League, they had someone they would sell.
And it's still got, I mean, in the departure lines now, even after Celtic's, for them, poor result against Dundee, a poor performance, you can still look at that Celtic team and say, you know, there's 4 or 5, you know, off the top of the head that you could sell on for good money.
Yeah.
And so, could you say the same about Rangers? I don't think so. I mean, Rangers' best player is a lone player.
Yeah, the other aspect of it as well, which I think he does need help, and this is where I'm trying to look at the balance on it from his point of view, because sometimes when you get that repetitive nature and the results still come a cropper, you start to get to the point where you start saying, well, he's talking in riddles. You know, how many times have we gone into press conferences with managers who start just, you know, rolling out the same excuses? I'm trying to cut Philippe Clement some slack on the basis that, as well as the structure that you've highlighted, the board has not been great. The recruitment has been poor because they've had money, Michael. Yeah. They've had money and sufficient money to make good signings. The strategy, you know, from various sporting directors and you know, people scouting is clearly wrong. Yeah. And that over the last 10 years has basically, you know, as well as the structure of going to court and fighting every court case you could think of, which takes away a lot of funds, you have a situation where they've made mistakes when they've recruited players, and when they've been at the peak where you thought sell them, they've reneged on it. They only had Bassey and Patterson
and Aribo.
And Aribo. So out of that, all the other players, they've made mistakes on it. So that, again, is a situation which I think has gone against them.
I mean, one of the, you know, again, Patrick Stewart talked about the aspiration being to be serial league winners in Scotland, right? Now, that for Rangers, that is a legitimate aspiration. I'm not sure it's realistic, though, in the current climate, for them to be serial league winners. I mean, Celtic would have to fall off a cliff for that to come round again. And in terms of the recruitment, they haven't got a squad that can win the league in Scotland. I mean, this is a squad that struggles in half of the fixtures, i.e. the away ones. You know, yeah. I mean, what prospect have you got of mounting a serious challenge and going the distance with Celtic if you're so vulnerable away from home all the time?
Yeah.
And what's the gap now? 16. I think it's probably going to be more than 16 at the end of the season, isn't it? You'd be surprised if it's any less than that.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this, which is the one thing that you always have to do as a journalist when you sit in a press box, and of course the smart fans, quite simply, Alison, is don't let your eyes deceive you. What type of football are they playing? And it's not great to watch.
Yeah, I think the frustration will be that on their day, they're capable. It's a squad that appears capable and flashes of playing well. If you think of the European games, they've played well. In the Europa League this season, they've played well. The game against Celtic on the 2nd of January, they played well. You know, you're kind of greater than the sum of your parts almost. You're getting a tune out of them. The problem is doing it on a consistent basis. And if you're going to challenge and be a credible title winner or contender, you have to have a level of consistency that's been noticeably absent from Rangers.
I don't see enough players with I mean, he's had injuries, okay, everybody gets them. I don't see enough players with a trick. I don't see a player who's an enforcer, somebody who gets it. You know, they've already questioned the leadership of James Tavernier, which, you know, I can't wait for James Tavernier leaves and then they have to replace 130 goals, you know, and the right back doesn't get beyond the halfway line. But ultimately, from Rangers' perspective, it's not rocket science. You get, you know, good goalkeeper, good back four, then you can build from there. But there's no real flair from the middle of the park to the front that you think, oh, dangerous.
Yeah, and that's and this I think it's well known, isn't it, that they struggle against teams that are kind of sitting in and inviting them on and trying to counter attack against them. Rangers struggle when they don't have that space to go into, and the better teams do give them that space. And you know, Gamani, I think, is a good player. Czerny can be dangerous. Hadji has his moments as well. And you know, when they've got a bit of room to flood into against your Tottenham or occasionally Celtic in the Old Firm games, that they can do it. But when a team's sitting in and just saying, "Come on in," you know, they can keep them at bay. It's all in front of the opposition team, isn't it? And they can punch themselves out.
Well, it's one of those situations where they have to make a conscious decision of going forward. And as Michael rightly points out, Hugh, with this plan in place, with the manager in place, I'm not so sure he's going to last to the end of the season. I think because of the critical element of season ticket renewals and the apathy and the anger that's kicking in. I think they'd need to go on a hell of a run, you know, and produce something. But again, as Michael said, there are staggered moments which buy him time. A good result against Manchester United, you know, a convincing bit of flair, certainly not Fraser-Borough, but as they move on, it needs to be something that you can start to see, okay, every time he picks a side, I can pick 8 or 9 of them. I'm not so sure the way it's going at the moment that he can last the pace on that. The other thing is, as well as their strategy of signing, who do they get that understands what Rangers are all about?
Yeah, and if you're really understanding what Rangers are all about, you know, when I'm talking about not the culture of winning, not the desire for preeminence in Scotland, but what they're really about at the moment, which is cost cutting, which is revitalising a team through, shall we say, ambitious recruitment, going for younger players, not the certainties that you might think. That's the reality of Rangers. And Rangers will always attract a level of manager. It's a huge club, and managers always think, I'm the man that can do this. There's that level. But there's becoming a thing now where people will be looking at the club and saying, do I want to go into that? Because if you look at Clement, and Beale was just a madness, a moment of extraordinary madness, and we said it at the time when I hired them. But if you look at the couple of managers, Van Bronckhorst and Clement, they're very good appointments. Very good appointments. If you said Rangers are getting a guy that's won the Eredivisie, who's a World Cup player, who's played at the club, who knows what it's about, he's obviously a talented coach, Van Bronckhorst is a great appointment. Clement, a guy that wins a similar league with 2 different teams, had a bad done at Monaco. You say, that's that's not a daft appointment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because that's the market, and that's not to be disparaging at all. These are coaches with a track record that they're coming in and they've performed at the level roughly, comparable leagues and all that Rangers need to perform at. They're not going to be able to attract managers from the English Premier League. I know they've got linked with Potter and so on. These guys are not going to come here.
It's madness. Davy Moyes, the thing, you say, God,
it's not the direction of travel for coaches at that level, you know. So, as you says, it's either that or you look around Scotland, and that's a hard sell to the Rangers support.
Every manager who comes to Scottish football is hoping that it's some kind of stepping stone to the Championship.
Absolutely.
Any different from players.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I think the job can chew managers up, and I think we've all seen the kind of thing that does around online about, the cycle that Rangers are kind of locked into, and it ends with the manager getting sacked. And I think we haven't seen that they're out of that cycle yet. They've stuck with the manager now, but there's certain pinch points in their season. They'll have 2, possibly 3 Old Firm games to come. Now, they've handled the last 2 well, but maybe they won't handle the next 2 well, and then suddenly it's all on Clement again.
I think the season ticket renewal process is fairly interesting, because it's almost the only power that you have as a fan. I think if you look at the walkout and you look at the simmering unrest, the only real power that you have is your money. So if it comes to a season ticket renewal and people start to withhold that, or maybe hang off just to see, how long can I go? And I think a lot of fans end up, for many people, there's so much round about going to watch football and renewing your season ticket that it's almost just a cultural part of your life and week and experience. But I do wonder if that might just have an effect on decision making.
Let's cut to the chase. Is he there in the summer?
I think it really depends on the latter half of the campaign. I think if for example, there were 3 more games against Celtic and you lose every one of them, and you maybe lose one of them heavily, it invites a certain kind of pressure. If you finish the league campaign miles off the pace, if it goes to 19, 20 points, as it conceivably could do, is there enough evidence to say that things are moving in the direction that you want to go? Is there enough evidence to say that you're capable of maybe pushing Celtic to a level? Is that a palatable chasm between the teams? I don't know. I think there are too many vagaries between now and then to make a call.
Of the vagaries,
I would say no. I think it goes in the summer. if I was an Ibrox director, I would be opposed to that. I would say, listen, my gut feeling is in this, that we have to be in this for the long haul. We have to shut out, we have to stick to our strategy of, backing the manager, getting things in place for him, changing the whole dynamic of the club, etc., etc. But as I've said repeatedly in this programme, that's fantastic, but it dissolves in contact with reality.
Michael?
Opening day of the next season, I suspect it'll be a different manager, but if they win the Scottish Cup, for example, that I think the board would seize on that and say, look, there's enough here for us to stick with this guy.
She's some credit in the bank.
Who knows, if you take the first half of the season, the first half of the season is repeated in the second half of the season, then the noise around him will become unsurvivable, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we're not going to be two-faced with you, Michael. We felt as if, some managers and players, they avoid, the red-hot nature of a press conference when things are getting difficult. And then we lost your tracker. We were tracking you to see, and then of course out came the press release, I'm at a meeting that nobody had ever heard of, and we actually got to the point where we're thinking to ourselves, Hugh, he's avoiding us on the Dandy Dons.
Probably avoiding us in several reasons, to be fair.
I mean, the great thing about journalists, and I always remember this from when somebody asks a question when the manager is battering you, and all the journals usually just take a wee shift to the right to leave the stupid person for asking that question. And everybody just rounded on you last week. McGowan, we're all there and we're thinking, he's nowhere to be seen. And it was going to be, I was really tempted to start the competition. Have you seen Michael Grant? And if you can, you win yourself a cash prize.
How much a surprise, I could have
So the Dandy Dons, 11 games without a win after going 11 unbeaten at the start. And of course, I looked at it and I thought to myself, wow, 16 games in all competitions. The run was fantastic. And then after that 6-0 loss to Celtic, it's 1 win in 13, 8 defeats and 4 draws. What's gone wrong?
What's going wrong? Yeah, it's. I think you're right to point to that Celtic game, and I know that they won the next game 4-1 against Dundee, and people said, "Oh, look at that response and look at that reaction," and they've shown what they're about. I remember watching that game against Dundee, and it wasn't really a 4-1, But take that aside, and the 6-0 stands out in the season as an absolute turning point in terms of results, and I think it did rattle them. I think it rattled the players a little bit to lose so badly, because they were enjoying that run, and I think maybe they were getting a bit ahead of themselves in some cases about just how good they were and where the season was to go. So you can always lose to Celtic at Hampden, but to kind of be battered like that, and it was a failure in various respects, and then just a rot sets in. The confidence goes down, players start to make individual errors. And areas of the team, notably the defence, make collective errors that they weren't making at the start of the season. They were keeping clean sheets at the start of the season. Substitutions that Thelin was making at the end, he got this great reputation for making game-changing, game-winning late substitutions. That stopped working for him,
Yeah. How much of it is what I was discussing with you before we came on here, which is basically the thing that nobody sometimes takes into consideration, which is other managers are paid to do a job with their coaches, with their strategists, and they say, listen, this is Aberdeen play. Yeah. I mean, I made a point of, going up 3-4 times to Pittodrie, and then when you're watching them on the television as well, it didn't take a rocket scientist to work out. They do make mistakes at the back, but Nielsen's 33. He guides everything. He talks them through everything. Shinnie's his sidekick that he hopes has got enough legs, and they hold. And then you're hoping Keskinen's got a trick, or you're hoping McGrath. Other than that, it didn't take anybody too long to work out this is how we beat them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Thelin wants his teams to play out from the back. That's really hard in Scotland if you haven't got Celtic and Rangers resources. It's really hard to build a team that plays out from the back and passes. There's not really a history of it. In Scottish football, in the Premier era. But that's what Thelin wants to do, and I think you're right that teams have learned if we can press hard, press higher against them and force them into mistakes, they will make mistakes. But also, I mean, some of the goals they've conceded, it's not about pressing, it's about playing long balls down through the middle.
Yeah.
You know, they've been so soft in this central pairing especially. And you know, some of that is just individual errors. So it's multifaceted, Peter. There's not one issue that you think that's going wrong. It's kind of one thing's led into the other. So what you've seen in January is that they've been the kind of busiest team in the market, in the division. I think that's what the Aberdeen supporters wanted. I also think it's what Thelin deserves, because in some cases, the Motherwell game a couple of weeks ago, they started with 9 guys that were there last season. Now, that team last season got 2 managers sacked. You know,
Yeah.
If you count Warnock as a sacking, but it was certainly a failed tenure. So that was a group of players that hadn't been winning matches. Thelin comes in, a couple of additions, and he gets a tune out of them, but maybe it wasn't ever going to last in that sense. So Aberdeen have made it emphatically clear that Thelin is the manager, you know, long term. His body of work at Elfsborg was impressive enough for them to believe that. And you know, your point about other managers have kind of sussed them out. You're right, and I think it's now Thelin will see. Well, let's see how he then responds to that.
Yes.
Now, in the last week or so, it looks like his first reaction is, I need better players. You know.
Yeah.
The boy Tobers came in, Latvian captain, looked pretty solid against Hearts. The Alexander Jensen, the Danish fullback, who knows? But you know, again, a £650,000 fee. Tobers was 700. Doesn't always mean anything really, but that kind of money tends to show in Scottish football. You tend to get
Absolutely.
quality.
Yeah.
You know, the old firm would regard that as being buttons really, but for anybody else, that's a significant investment. You know, Keskinen was 800,000. There's still more to come from him, but you can see that Thelin likes his pace and all the rest of it. He wants to get leadership in the team. He wants more pace in the team. I think the signings are interesting, and they need to have an impact, because it's been a bit of a tailspin, frankly.
Yeah, stopping goals is a key. You mentioned Jensen, Dorrington on loan from Tottenham, Tobers, Ockles will offer another chance to get some trickery on the wing as well. So that's 5. I imagine he might get a couple more before that window closes, and then the conundrum then is, let's see how they deal with the second half of the season. We talk about it regularly. When you think, as we were discussing, the amount of points that Rangers have shipped, even if Aberdeen had not had a collapse, they would be in the race for second and could possibly have been some points ahead of Rangers.
I have to be honest and say, even when they started the season so well, I didn't ever think it was viable that they would go and challenge for second spot. I always felt as though Rangers
Did you
would
see it as a
have
bigger
too
collapse?
much. I didn't see the collapse coming, but I always felt as though Rangers had sufficient reserves to go and get second. I didn't think second was ever really a question. Third is a different question entirely. They should have had third sealed and signed up. There shouldn't have been any ambiguity about them finishing there, just given the start that they'd made to the campaign. I think there'll be real frustration at the way it's descended just since about the end of October, the start of November.
Yeah.
And I think what you see often when teams are on a streak like that is there becomes a real vulnerability about it. There becomes a fragility about the team in moments of adversity within games, that you can't manage it the same way that you do when the converse is true and you're winning and you're maybe coming out of games with all 3 points when you've probably not deserved to do. So I'm thinking of games like at the start of the season when Aberdeen were down at Hampden Park, won the game, the last kick of the ball, you think Dundee deserved to take something. I think the converse becomes true when you're losing, that you're taking nothing, that nothing goes from you. So I think you'll look to try and just find a bit of stability again. I still think third is possible. I still think third should be the objective, and I think there'll be real frustration at the manner that they've let that slip.
Yeah, the point is, and Michael, you were on the show and we were all here earlier in the season, and you know, we have lots of Aberdeen fans who message us on our YouTube channel who basically are saying,
And the complimentary?
no, but the great thing about it is, I have to say to you, at the start of the season. Yeah, I like the odd tweet that I put out there that I can get absolutely battered, and every Dons fan was giving me an absolute doing when I suggested Malky Mackay or Neil Lennon as potential candidates for the manager of Aberdeen, on the basis that if you're an Aberdeen board, and by the way, I have to tell you, from an insider knowledge on it, Aberdeen seriously considered Neil Lennon. They thought he was a good candidate. They thought he had a great CV. Like him or loathe him, for whatever reason, I think Neil Lennon is a good coach. And, for the debacle of that 10 in a row season for Celtic, you don't suddenly become a bad coach when you've come in two different times and led them to titles. And he knows a player. And I thought it was a logical thing. Malky's career, for whatever misdemeanours he's been, rightly tagged with, was a Premier League manager. So they've got a good CV. They brought in Jimmy Thelin. He wins 16 games, and the Dons fans are absolutely giving it to me, which is fantastic, Hugh. But the flip side of it all is, when you go on the bad run, that's why I like Jimmy Thelin keeping his what I call monotone press conference, because the highs sounded exactly like the lows on this situation.
But the thing is, it's like, again, it's almost like the Rangers thing where you come up with a strategy. And Aberdeen, by the way, have done this before. They've come up with a strategy, say, no, we're going for a certain type of coach. They did it with Glass. To a certain extent, they did it with Barry Robson. They said, no, this is the kind of coach that we want. And the come looked at Thelin and said, no, this is a really good CV in a comparable situation with budgets, opposition, etc. If you take Celtic and Rangers out of it, this guy consistently and persistently, does well. So I think the strategy behind Thelin is bang on. Yeah. And I actually think, if you were, sober guy in the board, you're saying, this has been okay. He's given us, okay, we're on a terrible run at the moment, but he gave us an injection of enthusiasm. The fans reacted to it, went in a good run, we're now in a bad run. The problems Michael talked about, a lot of the guys that are underperforming are still here. We don't expect him to be a magician. Back him and see what he does. So I think Thellin's in absolutely, I laughed at when people was talking about, his age. I think he's under no threat whatsoever.
Yeah.
I think
the fact that they've backed him in the window.
I thought it was the most, the most reasonable thing. They've got to do it. They've got to be in. They've got to say this is what we want in the short term.
The picture is fudged a bit because you've had two extremes of runs. You've had this real purple patch in the way that they started the season, and then you've had this abject run for the last couple of months where they can't buy a win or buy points. I think if you to take it, merge the two together and see where they are, if it had been more of a mixed bag but they had the same level of points that they are on now, the assessment would be different.
I think you're spot on, Ali, because I think the run did raise expectations, or it got everybody looking at Aberdeen and thinking they're there, and they're not there over the course of a season.
Yeah. But do you remember in October, Michael, we all sat here and, and the Aberdeen fans rightly steamed in and said, listen, you lot for the West, I love that siege mentality again. Listen, you lot, you said we'd collapse in October. They didn't. But then, who saw them collapsing in November? We all said on this programme, if they can get to that January transfer room, were they 9 points clear of Rangers at one point? Was it 9? And I said, if they can get to the January transfer window with maybe 3-4 points of an advantage and allow this man to get his first real good, strong transfer window, albeit January's not the best, then maybe they could challenge them. Yeah. But that flip side of Rangers collapse and Aberdeen totally collapsing.
Yeah. Listen, if you'd said in the summer, at the turn of the year, Aberdeen will be third, fourth, right? And, whatever it is, 6-9 points behind. But third or fourth, I think most fans would go, yeah. Given the mess the team was in last season, finished 7th, and that was thanks to a strong finish under Peter Leven. But I think there's 10 points ahead of where they were at the same point last season.
Yeah.
So, that's all okay, but it's just, as Ali says, it's this weird way of getting there. And of course the worry is that they're still on this bad run, so they have to show that they've bottomed out. Now, Thelin talked about the 4-0 at Rugby Park a couple of weeks ago. As hopefully that's the worst of the season.
Yeah.
And although they've not got wins, they have shown spells recently. Ross County, they should have won. They had chances galore to win that match. Motherwell, silly sending off, down to 10 men, lose 2 goals. Actually played really well the second half. You know, they could easily got hit the bar, could have got back into that game. And against Hearts, probably edged it, but could have lost it. It's exactly what Ali's talking about, things going against them. A silly tackle, they concede a penalty right at the end. Everybody's saying, here we go again. And a wonder save. Terrific save by Ross Doon. And, you know, do you hope that is something that can galvanise them?
Yeah.
I think that might be asking a lot, because I think the team is not playing with any confidence. But
in this league, though, Michael, teams, you know, if you look back over, you know, where they eventually finish up, all of the teams who, you know, Hearts as well as, you know, not so much Rangers, but Hearts, when they finish third, there is a block where they tail off and they have a run of bad results. I think Aberdeen will just, after Rangers, I think there's a run up until the end of February where they face Celtic, where there's winnable games, there's a chance to reinstall the confidence. That, you know, providing, of course, even a fraction of these new signings get in there and are regular starters, I can see them turning it around again. I never have once thought, let's start looking at Jimmy Thelin for the boot. I think he's a manager that deserves his windows, and let's see what he does.
Sounding, you know, you're not plucking at straws, but they have had a lot of injuries as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, every team does, but they have had injuries. And it's all added to this mix of just negativity and kind of decline. Has to turn around.
Yeah. There's an announcement that came last week, which again is an Aberdeen link to it, which is Dean Windass sadly announced that he had stage 2 dementia. Now, Ali and I were talking about it. I mean, when he was at Aberdeen, he was such a really infectious character. I mean, I thought he was a great player, Dean Windass. I remember thinking at the time, I think it was around about 94, 95. Yeah. I thought it was a really great signing for Aberdeen at the time. And then when you look at his career down south and some of the spectacular goals, to see a man of his stature at 55 suddenly announce stage 2 dementia, it again heightens the real worry and the real need for some kind of structure in place to address a situation where footballers are 3.5 times more likely. In some other sports as well, you know, the percentages go up. I know the Americans and American football have looked at it in greater detail as well. You know, how do we solve it? How do we help it? How do we get a structure? We are poor neighbours up here, and our system couldn't actually cope with a Dean Windass up here.
No, that's a worry, Peter. You and I were speaking about it before we came on air, and there is such a discrepancy between PFA and PFA Scotland in terms of resources and finances, and that's a historical issue with the PFA Scotland, because they weren't able 20 years ago, 25 years ago, to kind of hitch themselves to TV deals. And obviously the PFA in England did do that. So they're a very cash-rich union. But even they, I mean, Don Astle has been very critical of the PFA in England.
Yeah, this is Jeff's daughter.
Jeff's daughter, Jeff, who famously...
Chris Sutton as well over his father.
Yeah. So they've, and I think she has said that they've almost been kind of shamed into action, and I think they are doing more now, and they've got Dawn Astle involved, brought her in, but they're trying to set up a fund, I think, for players who are affected by these neurodegenerative diseases. Your worry is that in Scotland, you know, there isn't the resource to do that.
Yes.
You know? And our players are equally susceptible to it. Of course they are, you know.
Yeah. The other thing about it, and I'm being ever the cynic on these things, but sometimes when you play football, I mean, I think David May was quoted as saying on one of the sports shows this week that would he change anything? And he went, I headed the ball thousands of times, but 100% I wanted to be a footballer. I would do the same again. The issue here is if clubs can't afford it, suddenly they start to put a rider in saying, listen, you have signed up to a game in which the risks are high, you have to accept that without liability on us. Because as you know, in most aspects of football, Hugh, strict liability is not on the agenda.
No, I mean, because these are private businesses by and large. These are, all working together as a conglomerate. The NFL's, you always look at America with these things because there's bigger bucks there, bigger lawyers there, and the NFL's interested in the way the NFL's going to go about this. And that's basically the route they're going to go down. They're going to have waivers, while part of the waivers, you sign a waiver, but we'll take some of this vast television money and we'll put it into a pool, etc., etc. Because American football, head trauma, is extraordinary levels. Can you imagine? I was once at Foxborough Stadium and I was taken down to watch the Patriots versus the Jets from the sideline, and it was like I've never heard anything like this before. It was like a car crash when the two front, the offensive line, the defensive line came together. These guys, 20 stone and more, athletic, strong, head down into each other. You're just going, you see yourself, my goodness, the trauma here is extraordinary. The thing about football is that there's a possibility in football that you could get around it in some way by changing the rules. And you can make heading illegal. But that would change the whole game. It would change the whole sport. Because see, if you think about it, it would take it to a long ball sport instead of a passing sport, because how do you get up the field quickly? Just knock the ball long, because nobody can head it. So it would be a revolutionary thing. But I think it'll probably go the same way as the NFL, where you bring in waivers and there'll be a sweetener that sponsors, broadcasters, clubs will put into a pool for sufferers.
Yeah, I think, especially the likes of Jeff Assel's daughter Dawn and Chris Sutton spoke about it. Lots of people have addressed the problem, but I think certainly up here you would like to see moves towards a solution, and I don't know whether that's some kind of insurance policy that everybody has to contribute to. I know that certainly I think today there's an Alzheimer's press conference where a number of players will be there. Obviously they'll be asked about football games, but they'll have to address the issue, which is quite simply, how do we help? How do we have a structure? We need to start looking for a solution rather than constantly saying, oh, that's sad, here's the problem. We just have to suck it up.
It's very difficult because football will be very reticent to say that they are the source of this issue. Dementia and Alzheimer's will affect a significant part of an ageing population. What you have seen is obviously a far greater propensity to that if you have repeatedly headed a ball or boxed or done any kind of contact sport where there is repeated trauma
Rugby.
to the head. Rugby, anything that's going to invite a kind of trauma, I think you're exposed then to issues, very serious issues in later life. But I think football will be very reluctant to accept full liability for that in a first instance. How you solve it, I don't have the answer to it. I don't know that there is an easy.
You can understand the frustration of the campaigners on this, because it kind of bubbles up every so often, and we in the media talk about it, and there's a wee bit of debate about heading. Do we get rid of heading, or do we get rid of heading in youth football, which has come in?
Yeah.
But I get the feeling it never really takes hold as a permanent thing where people are realising the seriousness of this.
Yeah.
And Dean Windass is like
55.
55.
It's not old. You'd maybe expect this.
And not a guy whose career would have been marked by heading the ball.
Exactly.
Yeah. Listen, English FA, Scottish FA, obviously there's guidance to reduce the amount of heading, which is one part of it. The FA in England has partnered with Alzheimer's Society to raise the awareness, which again is, I think, just posturing. But they've got to try and look for some kind of funding, some kind of structure and foundation which says if this happens, then you can highlight it to the particular FA and they get you help. I think that needs to be in place right across. That's what I think Chris Sutton and so many others will have been pushing for. Listen, there needs to be something in place that takes care of someone. I mean, Ruffy goes to a gathering of former players and fans for memories of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. They go at Firhill and he'll sit and chat with them. And some people are amazing because it's almost like that one little shaft of light comes through when they show them a picture of them in a game, and a former player will go, "Oh, I remember him, I played in that game."
I was at a meeting with Ruffy at Firhill because I've been involved with this football memories thing for many years, because I think it's a Scottish innovation as well, and it's one of the great Scottish innovations. And I was there with Ruffy one day and at Firhill, and the Firhill historian Robert was talking very eloquently about a player and showing a picture of the player and showing his boot. And this guy who was sitting in a wheelchair said, "He was my favourite player." And his carer, who was sitting behind him, almost dropped her cup of tea onto the floor. So after the meeting, I went up to him and said, "Well, you're very surprised that your client saying something." So I've worked with him for 3 years. That's the first thing I've ever heard him speak.
That's incredible, though.
Yeah,
it's like real formative core memories.
Well, it's an extraordinary thing, because like people will say that the great quote was a woman who says, "I take this very ill man that is not engaged in any way with me to a meeting, a football memories meeting, and for that half hour, my husband, in a little flickering way, is back."
Yes.
By the time we get him in the car and go down the road, it's back. He's back to the way he was before the meeting.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And one of the things, as you know, that's happening as well is that it's becoming into music as well. Music seems to.
I was going to say sometimes a song can just.
And it's.
Not so much a memory. It actually flickers.
There's a recognition,
sing it.
recognition and singing. But I talked to Willie Stewart, Dr. Willie Stewart, who's at the forefront of this research fight, forefront of everything to do with head trauma and sport. And it's this thing, the brain is, he'll tell you, he's one of the great neuro brains of the world. And he'll tell you that much of it is still a mystery. Although he'll be very strong on the trauma causes it. But the whole brain thing is still a mystery to us.
Yep, our heart goes out to Dean Windass and so many others right across all the sports who are suffering. The families have the pain of it as it continues, this degenerative process, which is heartbreaking to say the least. The person that you knew, which was a shining light, and maybe excelled in a particular sport or in a particular job in life, and then it just diminishes from there. It's heartbreaking. Let's hope that we get a quick solution that suddenly helps people who have to care for those individuals. Just before we go, I mean, obviously I try and think about things, and I haven't got a top 5 this week, Ali. You'll be absolutely delighted. But I have got the great way to talk about managers and the way football's going. Sometimes I'm not just blaming it on foreign owners, but there is a situation now where companies and businesses who look at managers and positions are less tolerant of a short period of failure when they're losing games, and they'll sack them. I mean, Steve Cooper, Leicester City, bulleted outside the actual drop zone at that point. No sympathy. Ten Hag was dead man walking for a long time. Gary O'Neill replaced by Vitor Pereira. Russell Martin, Julian Lopetegui, and also Sean Dyche at Everton. The Sean Dyche one resonated with me because I thought it was particularly callous that they couldn't even acknowledge the fact that this man had kept him in the Premier League for 2 seasons. Meanwhile, they're getting fined and dropped, penalised with points all over the place. Yeah,
although bizarrely or coincidentally, I was at a game at Goodison about 2 months ago, and the fans were not having him. The team wasn't scoring goals. The atmosphere at one of the great grounds was flat as anything. But against Brentford that day, Brentford had 10 men for an hour, and Everton couldn't score against them. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Clement. Sometimes when the fans are against you, your time's up. But see, Peter, when you told me we were discussing this, I looked at the kind of managers' sack race, you know, the odds of who is in the game of Russian roulette in the English Premier League, right? And at the top of it included the Wolves manager, who's had about 4 games, the Southampton manager, who's had about 5 games, Amorim, who's had about, whatever it is, 13 games, Van Nistelrooy, who's just in the door at Leicester. And these are the guys with the shortest odds to get sacked.
And let's not forget, Ange will be in that list.
Sorry, Ange as well. But my point being, at least Ange has been there a while. These guys are just in the door, and it's immediately, oh, well, the results haven't turned. He's 4-1 to get the bullet.
It's one of those topics where we should actually spend a lot more time, but obviously, as you can understand, trying to fit everything in, and we all like a good blether about these things. But again, with managers are there to try and work out a strategy, be it from a chess perspective on how to win a game. Russell Martin came in with a situation at Southampton where he said, I'm going to play this way. And I'm going to stick to my guns on this. This is the way I want to play football. They've lost 36 goals. He's dedicated to the team passing from out of the back. Michael alluded to it. That's fine if you've got, that's fine if you've got Danny Alves and Eric Abidal on your left-hand side.
I think you could do a whole show on passing out from the back.
It does my head in, by the way, honestly. I remember actually, do you remember Mixu started it at Kilmarnock? Roll it out from the back, and I'm thinking, Mixu, you haven't got 4 players that can actually control the ball in the back. You want them to play it out.
I wonder if football will evolve beyond it, because obviously it's so widespread since Pep kind of made it commonplace, and so many teams are doing it when they're not capable of doing it.
It's a line in the sand from the Barcelona purist football. That's where that's where people thought, oh, everybody's got to play that way.
I'll be honest. I remember watching PSG do it at Partick.
Oh, I remember when Rabiot went along the line. His own. I said, went on his own goal line with it. Even I was going.
Absolute pandemonium of a Champions League night at Parkhead, where you're supposed to go weak at the knees.
Michael, I sometimes sit in the house on the couch and go, what the fuck? Kick it, clear it, launch it.
But the point being, they could do it. And they were brilliant at it, and they won 5-0 that night. Man City at their best can do it, but there's not that many can do it. And I just wonder if tactically football will evolve, and enough coaches will say, this is too risky.
United have bucked a trend. Let's just launch it from a throw-in, and then we'll get...
I don't mind that. I think if that's the strength of your team, and it's working...
Sure, there's many ways to win a game.
Absolutely, and I think the interesting thing is when you come between coaching and managing, the coaches will come with ethos, principles, and clubs will buy into it. We want a team that plays this way. Managers is a different breed. Managers go in and say, oh, this is what I've got. Well, this is the way I'm going to play. I watched Dundee United. I was at Dundee United v Celtic last Wednesday, and Jim Goodwin managed his team perfectly. He says, this is what I've got. We're going to sit in. We're going to give Celtic the ball, because we'll give it, and then we can go into a shape. And any time we got up the park, we'll try and get a corner and launch it in, or we'll try and take a long throw into the box. That was it.
He really got something.
And he could have got something. The ball at 1-0, the ball fell unkindly for them at certain times, so they could have got something from it. But that was the way that he said.
This suits what I've got.
Because I think on the show before the Aberdeen 6-0, we were asked, what do you think about the weekend? And I was really confident that Celtic would beat Aberdeen at the weekend for 2 reasons. Once, it was a 2-game week for Aberdeen. So Celtic...
And the middle game was Rangers.
And Celtic can rejuvenate and revitalise better. The other thing is that Aberdeen would be going in confident and saying, well, we'll give you a bit of space here. And if you're doing that against better players, they'll kill you. Watch that interesting game the other night, Celtic Dundee. Celtic Dundee won, sort of got that point and could have won the game, playing in the manner that gave them the best chance to get a point.
Yeah, and but for that last minute penalty, they would have had a win, which was a long time. I think he waited about 30 years to try and get a win against Celtic, which is an unbelievable stat. Listen, I always love it when Michael comes on the show, and the good news is we're going to get Michael back on the show before Aberdeen win the Scottish Cup, just at midway point again. We always like to get him on just to get a kind of a...
Get me on after it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello, Michael. Are you sober yet?
August maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you on, Michael, and thanks to Hugh as ever and Alison McConnell on the Journos. If you like what you're listening to and watching, then hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. We'd love to have you on board. And if you download the app, all of it, breaking news, video content, is there at your fingertips. Thank you for listening and watching.